Millions of people have stood before Mount Rushmore and admired the giant stone faces carved into the mountain. But very few realize that hidden behind these famous presidents lies a secret chamber that was never meant for ordinary tourists. A hidden room sealed deep inside the mountain, containing one of America's strangest historical secrets. At first glance, Mount Rushmore appears to be exactly what history books describe: a monument honoring 4 American presidents. Yet hidden beyond public view is a place that remained unknown to most visitors for decades. The mystery begins behind the head of Abraham Lincoln. Hidden high above the reach of ordinary visitors is an unfinished passageway leading into the mountain itself. Few people have ever seen it in person, and even fewer know what lies beyond it. For years, rumors spread about what might be hidden inside. Some imagined secret government documents. Others believed it contained treasure, classified information, or evidence of forgotten history. The truth, however, is far more fascinating. To understand why this secret room exists, we have to go back nearly a century to the man who dreamed of creating something far greater than a giant sculpture. His name was Gutzon Borglum. Borglum did not see Mount Rushmore as merely a monument. He envisioned it as a message to future generations. A place that would preserve the story of America long after today's world had disappeared. As construction progressed, Borglum became concerned about one question. Thousands of years in the future, would people understand why the monument had been built? Would they know who these presidents were, or what America represented? His answer was ambitious. He wanted to create a hidden chamber inside the mountain, a giant hall of records that would contain the most important information about American history, government, and civilization. His answer was ambitious. He wanted to create a hidden chamber inside the mountain, a giant hall of records that would contain the most important information about American history, government, and civilization. It was an extraordinary vision, but turning that vision into reality would prove far more difficult than anyone expected. And deep inside the mountain, the greatest challenge was only beginning. While tourists admired the giant faces taking shape on the mountain, another project was quietly beginning behind Abraham Lincoln's head. Hidden from public attention, workers started carving a tunnel directly into the granite, laying the foundation for what Borglum hoped would become America's greatest historical archive. Borglum believed a monument alone was not enough. He feared that thousands of years in the future, people might see the giant faces but have no idea who these leaders were or why they had been carved into the mountain. His solution was extraordinary. Deep inside the mountain, he planned to create a hall of records, a chamber that would preserve the story of America for generations that had not yet been born. Construction crews began blasting through solid rock using dynamite and industrial drills. Every meter of progress required immense effort because the granite mountain was among the hardest materials they could possibly encounter. Day after day, workers pushed deeper into the mountain. The narrow tunnel slowly expanded, and Borglum's ambitious vision began taking physical shape inside the granite itself. Borglum imagined visitors of the distant future discovering this chamber and learning about American democracy, its leaders, its achievements, and the principles upon which the nation had been built. The Hall of Records was intended to contain important documents, biographies of the presidents, historical records, and explanations of America's place in world history. Yet despite the excitement surrounding the project, problems were already beginning to emerge. The Hall of Records was expensive, difficult to build, and receiving far less public attention than the giant sculptures outside. Funding became increasingly limited, and government support focused primarily on completing the presidential faces. As a result, resources available for the hidden chamber began shrinking. Borglum's dream was still alive, but time, money, and circumstances were beginning to work against him. Soon, a series of events would place the entire Hall of Records project in serious danger. By the late 1930s, the Hall of Records project had reached a critical turning point. The tunnel behind Lincoln's head existed, but the grand archive Borglum imagined was still far from complete. Money was becoming scarce, and pressure was mounting to focus entirely on finishing the presidential sculptures. Government officials increasingly viewed the Hall of Records as a secondary project. To them, the faces of Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln were the true priority. The hidden chamber, no matter how visionary, was slowly losing support. Then came an even greater obstacle. Funding became harder to secure, and every dollar spent on the secret chamber was a dollar not spent completing the monument visible to the public. Difficult choices had to be made. Borglum refused to abandon his dream. Even as obstacles grew larger, he continued promoting the Hall of Records as an essential part of Mount Rushmore's purpose. He believed future generations would thank him for preserving history. But history had other plans. In March of 1941, Gutzon Borglum died unexpectedly at the age of 73. With his death, Mount Rushmore lost not only its creator, but also the strongest advocate for the Hall of Records. After Borglum's death, leadership of the project passed to others. Their focus was practical: complete the monument, finish the faces, deliver the national landmark that Americans expected to see. The Hall of Records no longer received the same attention. Construction inside the mountain slowed dramatically, and eventually, the dream of a vast historical archive was set aside. What remained was a partially completed chamber, hidden behind Lincoln's head, a secret space that few people knew existed, and one that would remain largely forgotten for decades. For many years, visitors standing before Mount Rushmore had no idea that an unfinished tunnel existed behind the monument. The secret remained hidden in plain sight. Yet the story was not over. Decades later, a new generation would return to Borglum's forgotten vision. And what they placed inside the mountain would finally transform the secret chamber into something extraordinary. For decades, the unfinished chamber behind Mount Rushmore remained largely forgotten. Hidden deep inside the mountain, it sat in silence while millions of visitors admired the monument below, completely unaware that a secret passage existed above them. Then, nearly half a century after Borglum's death, officials decided to honor his original vision. They could not build the massive Hall of Records he had imagined, but they could finally create a symbolic version of it. In 1998, workers returned to the hidden chamber carrying something Borglum never lived to see. Not giant archives, not secret treasures, but a carefully designed vault intended to preserve knowledge for the distant future. Inside the chamber, officials placed a titanium vault. Titanium was chosen because of its incredible durability, resistance to corrosion, and ability to survive for centuries under harsh conditions. Within that vault were placed porcelain panels. These were not ordinary displays. They contained detailed information about Mount Rushmore, the presidents, the monument's construction, and the history of the United States itself. The goal was simple but profound. If future civilizations ever discovered the chamber, they would immediately understand who created Mount Rushmore and why it mattered. Contrary to popular rumors, the chamber does not contain gold, secret government files, or hidden treasures. The truth is less sensational, yet arguably far more important. It contains knowledge. Knowledge about a nation. Knowledge about democracy. Knowledge about the people whose faces were carved into the mountain. And knowledge intended to outlive generations. Yet, despite its historical significance, almost nobody is allowed to enter the chamber. The public cannot simply buy a ticket and visit. Access remains highly restricted even today. Which raises an obvious question. If the room contains only historical information, why is access so limited? The answer lies in the mountain itself, and it reveals another layer of the mystery that most visitors never hear about. The reason most people cannot visit the Hall of Records is surprisingly simple. The chamber was never designed as a tourist attraction. It was created as a protected archive, a message intended for the future rather than the present. Reaching the chamber is not easy. The passage behind Lincoln's head is steep, narrow, and difficult to access. Opening it to millions of visitors would create serious safety and preservation concerns. There is also another concern. Every year, Mount Rushmore receives millions of visitors. Allowing unrestricted access could damage the very archive that was built to survive for centuries. As a result, the Hall of Records remains one of America's least accessible historical sites. Most visitors leave Mount Rushmore without ever realizing that a secret chamber exists behind the monument. Ironically, the greatest secret of Mount Rushmore is not hidden because it contains dangerous information. It is hidden because almost nobody thinks to look beyond the giant stone faces. Borglum's dream was never fully completed. The vast Hall of Records he imagined was supposed to be much larger, far more elaborate, and filled with extensive historical information. Yet, in another sense, his vision succeeded. More than 80 years later, people are still talking about the secret room he imagined, still asking questions about its purpose, and still wondering what lies inside. Perhaps that is the true purpose of the Hall of Records, not merely to preserve information, but to remind future generations that history is more than dates and monuments. It is memory. Every year, millions of visitors stand beneath these enormous stone faces. Most admire the monument itself, but a few discover the hidden story behind it. And once they do, they never look at Mount Rushmore the same way again. Behind one of America's most famous landmarks lies a chamber built for the future. hidden inside a mountain, protected by stone, and filled with the story of a nation. This is Chronicle Studio. If you enjoy cinematic documentaries about hidden history, forgotten mysteries, and incredible true stories, subscribe to Chronicle Studio and join us on the next journey into the unknown.